Today, I want to talk about practice. What is it? Why is it valuable? And how do we actually do it? And I want to focus specifically for today's video, because there are likely to be many more of these, on the role of attention and awareness. First of all, I'm not saying this is practice. I'm saying this is how I experience practice. And what I really want to do is invite reflection and invite conversation about what does practice mean to you? And when I have guests on the show, that's really going to be what the questions are. What does practice mean to you? How did you come across it? How do you do it? I think that it's not optional in the world that we live in now. I think we need it more than ever. The world can feel like such a dark place, and for me, practice really is the only thing that can light the way forward. Now is not the time to lose heart. Now is the time to practice. I want to revisit this quote by the Buddha that I included at the beginning of the video. He says, "Practitioners, I know not one single thing more intractable and harmful than an untrained mind." Not one single thing more intractable and harmful than an untrained mind. That sounds pretty terrible. And the question is, well, then how do we actually train the mind? The first thing to recognize, I think, is that we don't really have good language for practice in our culture, which makes it really hard to talk about. Even when we import languages and ideas from other cultures, which has mostly been our strategy, and I'm looking forward to having conversations around appropriation, misappropriation, integration, adaptation, what all of that means. It's still decontextualized from the original culture, who likely had literally centuries for the practices to marinate, develop, evolve, and come to fruition in a particular context and language. So for that reason, I want to start off by defining some terms. And again, this isn't me saying this is what these terms mean. This is me saying this is what they mean to me right now. And one of the things with practice is that if you're doing it, hopefully your perspective changes over time. If your views and your language and the way your mind works isn't changing over time, I think that means your practice merits some close inspection. So why do I want to focus on language? Language is the building block of our meaning-making abilities. One of my teachers, Tom, defines the mind as the meaning-making apparatus. So if language is the foundation of that process we experience of mind, it's really important to think carefully about what is the language that we're using. Again, you don't need to agree. This is to invite reflection and to triangulate so that if we're looking at one object in the room from different perspectives, we can at least agree, oh, this is the same object we're looking at, even if we're looking at it from different perspectives. And personally, I think that multiplicity is the future. There is no scenario where we become standardized, where monocrop culture saves the day, and that's the path into the future. I think the only way forward is to exist in an environment, a social environment, in which all of our views can coexist together. I'll be making a future video about the detrimental effects of monocrop culture. In Sanskrit, they use the word sadhana, which is a word used to describe any dedicated, disciplined spiritual practice or methodology used to cultivate or facilitate certain processes and outcomes. In particular, self-realization, insight, actualization, inner peace, and overall developing an enhanced skillfulness in navigating the phenomenal world. And by that I mean the world of forms and appearances, the world as we experience it through the senses, as mediated, understood, and contextualized through the physical body and the conceptual mind, and responded to through our activities of body, speech, and mind. And that concept of the activities of body, speech, and mind is a concept I'm going to keep coming back to again and again and again, because I find it so helpful. In Buddhist lineage, they refer to those as the three gates. The idea being that you need to constantly be vigilant, guarding those three gates in order to operate effectively in the world, in order to operate effectively in your life. In a more general sense, the Merriam-Webster dictionary defines practice in a few different ways. The first is to carry out or apply, as in to practice what you preach, or to do or perform customarily or habitually, which I quite like. And the second is to perform or work at repeatedly so as to become proficient, or to train by repeated exercises. And I think those are actually really good definitions because they make a really good entryway into this conversation. The first thing to recognize, I think, is that we're all already practicing everything all the time. People understood this way before neuroplasticity entered the cultural lexicon as a buzzword, maybe in the mid-2000s. If you haven't heard that term, though you probably have, neuroplasticity, as I understand it, is basically the nervous system's adaptability and responsiveness to inputs or stimuli from internal and external environments. It was pretty revolutionary when it hit our culture. There was this prevalent and false idea that our brains somehow changed a bunch as a kid, and then when we grew up as adults, the brain just lost its ability to do that. Modern fMRI technology, stroke rehabilitation research, brain science, and academic study of habit formation have now proven that's not true. Now, this can be really good news or really terrible news, depending on how we respond to the process that's being pointed out here. It can be an amazing source of great hope. Essentially, it means that nothing is ever fixed, nothing is set in stone, things can change for the better. Buddhist teacher and creator of the 10-day Vipassana retreat format of practice, S.N. Goenka, talks about 3 levels of habit in terms of how ingrained they are. The first is a habit that is like taking a stick and brushing it through water. The second is taking that stick and brushing it through sand. And the third is essentially having to take a pickaxe and chisel it out of stone. And a lot of practice, honestly, involves accurately assessing which of these habits of my body, speech, and mind fall into which category. The terrible news is that if we don't wake up to the truth of what's being pointed out here and take responsibility for the cultivating and nurturing of that process, what risks happening is that we stay stuck, whether it's neurologically, behaviorally, relationally, in cycles and loops of self-perpetuated suffering, which is essentially how some of my teachers define samsara. And I'll talk more about samsara in future videos. But basically in Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain cosmology, samsara refers to a never-ending cycle of self-perpetuating suffering that beings are caught in until they begin to wake up to what's happening around them and practice in order to come out of those conditions. And though those systems have different approaches and languages and practices in some ways, the common sentiment is, yeah, we should really try to get ourselves out of samsara. This is one of the reasons why a prerequisite for practice is to develop an ability to slow down. It doesn't mean come to a full stop in the context of your life, but when you're in a hole thrashing around or you're stuck in quicksand, the first thing you need to do is stop moving and spread your weight out and become aware of your context and your situation. I think that's why so many of these practices involve connecting with the physical body and becoming aware of our embodiment, because our physical body is the primary instrument that we use in order to feel, in order to be in relationship, in order to sense the world around us. The interesting thing here is that the point of view in our culture and context is often looked at through the lens of good and evil. From the perspective I'm describing now, it's a totally different frame. It's not about good and evil, it's about awake or asleep. It's about wise and ignorant. In our culture, we have this view that if somebody causes harm, they need to be punished, sometimes violently. I agree that people need to be held accountable for their behaviors, but I think the perspective that harm comes from ignorance is actually much more compassionate and ultimately much more effective and helpful. If we took people who are incarcerated and rather than punishing them sometimes for life, and instead focused on rehabilitating them, on treating their mental health challenges, on helping them become free of their substance abuse, help them work through their childhood trauma, empowered them with financial resources, I think the outcomes would be really, really different. The reasoning behind this is that if we don't notice our behaviors, we're liable to act them out. If we don't feel our emotions, we're much more likely to actually become identified with them paradoxically without having awareness of the ways in which they're influencing our activities of body, speech, and mind. By beginning to notice our patterns and behaviors, we have at least a chance of escaping those patterns that are destructive to ourselves and to others. So in essence, what this view is saying is the greatest problem in the world is not evil, it's ignorance, it's lack of awareness. If you don't see your anger, you become your anger. It controls you without your knowledge. The ability to step back and observe it, to behold it and let it pass, to see how it distorts the mind, to see the intelligence behind it. We don't just want to eliminate anger, it's telling us something. Oh, I feel unsafe, I feel unheard, I feel misunderstood, something is wrong in culture. But in order to be able to start to work with it skillfully in that way, we first have to begin to bring awareness to it. As I mentioned before, the idea of neuroplasticity, the fact that our brains, our bodies, in fact, are constantly able to change, people were already pointing towards this phenomenon and developing applied practices that leverage the process for good. In the Teaching on the Two Sorts of Thinking Sutra, the Buddha, speaking primarily to a monastic audience, says, whatever a monk keeps pursuing with his thinking and pondering, that becomes the inclination of his awareness. What that means is that whatever you do, say, and think, that inclines you to do, say, and think that further. As I share some of this stuff, I really don't want you to take it at face value. I want you to question it. I want you to approach it with a deep sense of skepticism and check it with your own experience, apply it in your own life, and see if that is actually true. The core of what he's saying if we paraphrase it and apply it to a lay audience of not just male monastics, is whatever the mind inclines itself towards, that further becomes its inclination. And that ties us right back into neuroplasticity. I'm sure you've heard the proverb, neurons that fire together wire together. The analogy that's often used is that of a ski slope. Imagine it snows on the top of a mountain and nobody's skied it yet, and you get airlifted to the top of the mountain. What you see when you look down is this pristine sheath of snow that hasn't been touched yet. But as soon as one person skis down that slope, it creates grooves, it creates a track. The next person that gets airlifted onto that mountaintop might actually take a different path, and let's repeat that a few times. Let's repeat it 100 times or 1,000 times. Eventually what's going to start to happen is that certain paths become more well-worn than others. A skier now might be dropped on the top of the mountain and just kind of follow the path that was laid there before them. Now, imagine this effect compounding neurologically over the course of not just your life, but intergenerationally, over the course of tens of generations, hundreds of generations. Think about the social impacts. Think about the impact on the nervous system of living in a home when you're a child that feels unsafe or is under-resourced. Think about the grooves that begins to form in your mind that then, when you move into adulthood, you take with you. It's very likely that if you were shown anger and threat as a child, you might have internalized some sense of being unsafe in the world or become a perpetrator of that experience in order to keep yourself safe, having internalized the message that if I want to be safe, I actually need to be the aggressor. An angry mind is more likely to make us inclined towards having an angry mind. An anxious mind makes us more inclined towards having an anxious mind. And likewise, a kind and generous and calm and compassionate mind, a settled nervous system, a grounded body, a habit of moving the body or spending time bringing the body into nature is also going to compound. It's also going to begin to rewrite those grooves. So another way to think about this essentially is that we are learning machines. Our bodies, speech, and mind are constantly looking at what we did in order to forecast and predict what we're doing now or what we should be doing. So what do we do with this reality? So what? This is where mindfulness comes in. Now, I'll probably make future videos about mindfulness and what it is and what it isn't. I have tons of thoughts about it. But for now, I just want to say that mindfulness, that word, was brought into our culture in a way that completely decontextualized it from its historical, linguistic, cultural, spiritual roots and commodified it for the capitalist consumption of practitioners who wanted a boiled down, simple way of understanding practice that paradoxically is often used in order to become more productive, more anxious, like office-based mindfulness, so that you can become a more efficient cog in a giant impersonal machine that's using you to extract your labor and attention. For these purposes, and you might feel differently about this, essentially I just think about mindfulness as paying attention, to be mindful, to be full of mind. So rather than attention being back here and we're kind of going along an autopilot, we're bringing our attention, we're bringing fullness of mind into the experience that we're having, which we also know as paying attention. And what do we pay attention to? Behaviors of body, speech, and mind. Attention is like the breath. Thankfully, when we go to sleep, we lose conscious awareness of the breathing process, but that doesn't mean that the breathing process stops. Some deeply unconscious or preconscious part of us stays on and makes sure that even if we are outside of conscious awareness, once we've folded awareness inward, out of becoming cognizant of itself, a part of us knows that we need to keep breathing, whether or not we keep paying attention to the breath. Attention is the same. We don't stop paying attention to what we're paying attention to when we're not paying attention to it. What I mean by that is that if you don't bring awareness to what is in your awareness, what is in your awareness will essentially just be whatever is right before you, whatever is tastier to the senses in that moment. If we can begin to train our attention, that means we begin to become able to shift that flow of change. We begin to be able to harness the process of neuroplasticity, that insight that whatever we incline ourselves towards, we incline ourselves further towards. Eventually, we develop the muscles to be able to bring our mind where we want it to go, rather than just where it wants to go, rather than being swept up in its conditioned and forward or circular momentum. So we've established that practice is about attention. And there are a lot of different kinds of practice, right? Somebody who spends a lot of time being diligent about bringing their attention and awareness to physical activity, we might call an athlete. Somebody who brings attention to child rearing is a parent. Somebody who brings attention towards practices of creative expression, we might call an artist or musician. Somebody who brings attention to the healing arts, we might call a chiropractor or a therapist or a sound healer or a social worker, so forth. I'll be elaborating my perspectives on this in future videos. There will be probably plenty more about practice specifically, but here I just want to bring your attention to the fact that what I'm talking about is your intention and your attention. So for me, as a person who is affiliated with the Kagyu lineage of Tibetan Buddhist practice, I hear my teachers repeating over and over and over and over and over and over again the importance of intention. So it's not just about placing attention on the breath, for example, if you're doing a breath-focused practice. It's about being aware of what is the intention behind me doing this. Is it so that I can become a more powerful business person and take over the world more efficiently? Is it so that I can be a calmer and more grounded parent? Is it so that I can give myself the gift of rest before jumping into a really busy day? What is your intention? In my experience, it's only when we bring attention to our intention, why am I doing this, and our attention, where am I placing my focus, that freedom begins to manifest as a possibility or as a subjective experience. We begin to notice ourselves more clearly. We can begin to make small changes in our habitual response patterns. Now, we tend to denigrate small changes because as a culture overall, we're trained for instant gratification. We think that if it's not big and flashy, if I can't feel it right away, then nothing must be happening. Aside from the fact that practice compounds enormously over time, if you have two parallel lines and one of them shifts by 1%, you might look at that and say, nothing has changed here, or barely anything has changed. And I say, that's true, let's keep watching. And what actually starts to happen, if you're noticing, is that that 1% slowly begins to, over time, become a huge difference. If I end up here when I started here, and all that changed was 1%, that's enormously effective. So in practice, time is actually our friend. And I think that befriending time, which is another way I think of patience, is one of the most important things we can do in order to not just enjoy our lives and have a more easeful experience, but continue to surrender the fruits of our actions, continue to engage in a behavior over and over and over again, because we know it's beginning to shift the way we're thinking about things, the way we're engaging with ourselves in the world, in order to give time for that behavior to come to fruition. A really simple way of saying this is that practice is all about learning to be yourself well, to accurately read the context of your life, to accurately read the context of your relationships, your habits, your temperament, your character, your neurocognitive quirks, and beginning to develop a greater sense of agency around them. Which again is where intention is really important, because if what you want to do with that sense of agency, like some people on this planet at this time who are very visible political figures, is take more for yourself and cause harm to others on the way, you can actually do that. So the wisdom that brings attention to this process of being able to change our experience over time, the power that that represents, has to be brought together with compassion. The awareness that I'm actually not just doing this for myself, and that if I am just doing it for myself, that's an extremely short-sighted way to harness this process. If it's not obvious already why it would be valuable to begin to have a greater sense of agency and empowerment in the direction of our lives and move it in directions that bring us out of suffering gradually rather than deeper into states of suffering, if it's not enough that practice gives us a way to gradually stop drowning in the ocean of suffering we find ourselves in and learning to swim or navigate it with more and more proficiency, maybe we just frame it as a possibility of no longer being as enslaved or obstructed by our habitual tendencies. Maybe we just frame it as a way to begin to reclaim sovereignty over the directionality of our lives. And that begins by reclaiming sovereignty and agency over the directionality of our attention. It's partly why I called this channel Self-Destruct, because my aspiration is that the more you engage in these videos, the more you actually start to think about your attention and where you're placing it, and eventually maybe make the decision to pour less of your attention into your phone and your computer and more attention into the relationships and people in your life. It is my experience that through practice, we can begin to wake up from the zombified state of walking through the world and our lives only to find ourselves met over and over again with the negative results of our actions while still alive, and feelings of enormous remorse and dread when we're on our deathbeds. We're all gonna die, but there's probably nothing worse than a wasted life. So how do we do it? How do we actually start practicing? The answer, once again, comes back to attention. If you think of your mind as a pet, which I think is a really helpful analogy, the truth is that if you want a well-behaved, happy, well-nourished pet, they're not able to give that to themselves. You have to provide the environment, you have to provide the routine, You have to provide the attention and care in order for them to develop in those ways. If I get a dog and I bring them home and I leave food all over the floor and I never take them out to go to the bathroom, guess what they're gonna do? They're gonna eat all my food and shit all over my floor. And then I'll come down and my whole place will stink and there will be torn wrappers all over the place, and then I'll get angry at my dog because they did the wrong thing. They didn't do anything wrong. They're just following their basic instincts. And when I blame my dog, what I'm doing actually is taking my responsibility and placing it on someone who's not actually able to do that. Just in the same way as an immature parent might parentify their child and put them in a role to fulfill responsibilities they're in no way equipped to fulfill. That's another video for a future time. If I don't start to bring attention and care to the environment my dog lives in, eventually I'm going to start to get some pretty poorly behaved, angry, frustrated, and frankly unhappy dogs, which is probably going to make me pretty unhappy and frustrated. Our minds are just like this. They're always trying to chew on something, and they'll go for the lowest hanging fruit. They'll follow their noses and find the sweetest thing in the pantry that they can munch on. If they don't find something to chew on, they look for something else. So it's actually not enough for us to just want our minds to change. That's a really good start. It plants the seeds for behavioral change. It's about knowing how to actually engage in the practice and the behaviors that help our mind change, which is essentially to say, to create the environment of my life that fosters the possibility of beneficial change to take place. And that happens at the point at which we begin to infuse the change process with intention. Once we begin to recognize, oh my gosh, I'm not just a passive observer of this process, I have a really important role to play in this process. I have a responsibility towards this process. That would be the equivalent of the moment where we stop yelling at our dogs for making change they can't make and start to recognize our responsibility for it. And frankly, in my life and in cultural discourse and really all over, I see this happening over and over again. Even intelligent, well-intentioned, kind-hearted people at their core point their fingers towards outward sources of why their lives aren't changing, rather than taking responsibility for the ways in which they are interacting with their lives, they are interacting in their relationships, and practicing awareness and gratitude of the abundance of resources they have to actually begin to shift the process. I think this is why so many lineages of practice, particularly those that originated on the Indian subcontinent and spread throughout Southeast Asia and now the world, emphasize breath awareness ad nauseum, is because breath awareness is the doorway that opens the possibility of bringing greater attention to our experience. I have a very young practice. I've been practicing less than 15 years at this point, and I feel like I'm just starting to orient to what am I even doing here? I have teachers who've been practicing twice longer than I've been alive. And I remember when I first started practicing, which was in the context of yoga asana, body postures, the teachers I would be practicing with would almost all constantly reinforce the practice of returning attention to the breath. They would say, come back to the breath, bring your attention to the breath. Now, honestly, initially, not only did it confuse me, it irritated me. In my mind, I was like, I know, focus on the breath, I get it. How is this actually supposed to help me in living a better life? And why, when we ask all of these sages and wise people across history, hey, how do we actually help ourselves in this world? How do we actually work skillfully with the human condition? And they say, well, focus on the breath, start with that. And you go, okay, but what I've realized over time is that this is by far one of the most powerful foundations for anything else that we want to do with our practice. It's what in Buddhist context we might call a skillful means. Something that on the surface seems like pretty arbitrary, but actually is developed as a result of cross-generational practitioners investing their time and energy on figuring out, how do I actually live well? How do I be myself well? When I heard it initially, I thought, that's it? That's what I paid for coming into this class? This is what I paid for sitting on retreat, is for you to just tell me to focus on the breath? Where are my ecstatic God connection moments? Where are my mind orgasms that transcendentally elevate me out of my suffering? How is this actually going to pull me out of essentially not loving myself, not wanting to be in my body, not wanting to be in the context of my life? We want the flashy stuff. We want the insights. We want the pleasant feelings. We want people to gather around us and clap and say, oh my gosh, you're so smart and you're so intelligent. You're such a good girl. You're such a good boy. We really want this identity of I'm special. I stand out. I made it. I succeeded. Our cultural narrative is saturated with messaging of you are the chosen one, especially for young boys. And then we get all of these young boys that consume this idea of you are the special one and encounter the reality that in life, nobody really cares about you. and that the only person really watching your behaviors, unless you're a large-scale public figure, is yourself. And the only reward really that comes that is lasting is how it feels to be you, not how much money you have, not how many businesses you've built, not how many sexual partners you've had. We get excited about the insights and the stories and the texts articulated by longtime practitioners, and we want to skip to the good stuff without realizing that not skipping the good stuff, not skipping the long and steady process of developing strong foundations is what allowed those practitioners to get to that point in the first place. Not allowing their intention to be hijacked by the unconscious motivations that pull the strings, by really slowing down and being honest with themselves, by cultivating humility, is what allowed those practitioners to tap into something of meaning that they could then articulate to the rest of us. And when it's really meaningful, the rest of us gather around. The analogy that's used, I think, in the Upanishads is that when the flower opens, the bees swarm naturally. All that to say that starting as a strong skeptic and someone very resistant to the simplicity of these practices, I've fallen in love with breath-focused awareness practices, even if I'm not really good at them. And I'll probably make future videos talking about this more in depth, but I want to share some of the reasons why in this one. Growth and change are inevitable. We don't actually have to do anything. It's like when you go to a doctor with a broken arm and they put your arm in a cast, the doctor isn't actually healing your arm. They're creating the context through the cast in which your natural and intrinsic healing capacity that operates even without your conscious awareness is able to do what it needs to do. So in essence, the question in practice is, how do we set up the context that we need in order to step out of the way of our intrinsic wisdom and healing powers? Another way to put that is that we're not really trying to force ourselves to change, we're allowing ourselves to change. And in order to allow ourselves to change, we have to accurately identify, well, what are the factors that contribute to change and healing and growth? What are the factors that obstruct it? There's a proverb, I think a Taoist proverb, that says that you cannot make a plant grow faster by tugging on the leaves. I see a lot of people tugging on the leaves and becoming frustrated when their plants aren't growing, but neglecting to put them by the window where they'll get appropriate sunlight, or watering them on a regular schedule, or checking the soil quality. The paradox is that once we truly become aware of the factors that lead to healing and growth, it becomes so much less effort. I don't need to sit there staring at my plant or praying to the sky gods or the rain gods that water will come down. I can actually take a sense of ownership over the process. I can water my plants once a week or every other week, and then chill, sit back, enjoy the beauty it brings into my life. I'll be making a separate video about plant care and how powerful of a practice that is. Bringing it back to what I was talking about, the most important factor to cultivating my plants is to become aware of the fact that I have plants in my room. If I don't become aware of them, then they're just going to kind of languish on their own. And then I'll wonder what that weird smell is when they start to rot. If I'm watering them diligently and putting them in good sunlight, but every night I wake up with a lighter and I hold the lighter under the plants and wake up in the morning and wonder why the leaves are all burned, that's not going to be very helpful. Once I become aware of it and I go, oh, there are plants in my room, then I can become aware of my own ignorance. Oh, I have no idea how to take care of plants. Let me ask somebody who knows more than me. Let me do a Google search. Let me go to the library, as though people still do that, and read about it. Let me ask my AI. Beginning to notice our breath, beginning to notice the fact that just like these plants, the breath has always been in the room, is like beginning to weave together a thread. Tomato plants and cucumbers, if you don't give them something to grow up, will just sprawl and take over the garden. By giving them something to grow up, they can move towards the sun and create not only much richer yield, but also take up way less space. Practice as a whole, as supported by this entryway of breath awareness, begins to give our lives, just like these tomatoes and cucumbers, something to grow towards. It's the same reason why having a sense of purpose is the best thing you can do for your mental health. Not a purpose that somebody chose for you, not a purpose that you feel obligated towards, but something that you genuinely feel motivates you when you wake up in the morning. It doesn't make all the terrible things go away. It doesn't heal your cancer or change the political situation necessarily, but it gives you something to hold on to. It gives you a home base to find refuge in, a small area of stability in the vast ocean of existence that you can begin to feel yourself in, that you can begin to steer yourself with. The mechanics of how this works are actually pretty straightforward. Going back to the dictionary again for a moment, awareness is the quality or state of being aware, knowledge and understanding that something is happening or exists. Attention is the act or state of applying the mind to something. So in a way, I guess we could say that attention is what we do with awareness. It's knowing plus intention. And the common factor in both of these is that they require an object of awareness by definition. To be aware is to be aware of something. And going back to the dog analogy, if we don't give ourselves something to be aware of, the mind is going to roam loose in our home without containment and probably cause havoc. And then we'll experience that havoc and find all sorts of reasons why that's there other than we haven't been caring for our space. If the couch is on fire, it's the couch's fault. If the TV is broken, it's the TV's fault, not because I threw the remote at it. So by choosing an object and learning to place our attention on that object, we can begin to train our minds. We can begin to take ownership and control over where we bring our focus. Now, these practices were already so important 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, when people started practicing them. Imagine how much more important they are now. They didn't have iPhones. They did not have Instagram. They didn't steep in a sensory environment constantly trying to drag their attention away from them. But why the breath? Mala beads, rosaries are great. Meditation cushions and prayer mats are great. Devotional figures and statues, Jesus, Green Tara, Ganesh, wonderful. Synagogues and mosques and temples and churches, great. But we can't take them with us all the time. In the grand scheme of our life, the total amount of time we spend holding our rosary beads or praying at church is going to be a really small fraction of our lives. Those are really important, but how do we take something that we can then practice with throughout the rest of our life when we're not at church? This ignorance, this inattentiveness that has kept us swept up in the currents of habitual ignorance and dissociation are all pervasive. We've been doing them since our own births. Some people say since births before this birth. So the antidote and the remedy need to be equally potent, equally all pervasive. We take the breath for granted. But if I were to take it from you for 15 seconds, 30 seconds, 45 seconds, you would give me all your food, all of your sleep, all of your water, all of your money, just to get it back. You would make a vow of chastity and potentially throw a limb or two in there just to get your breath back for those 30 seconds. I think individually and culturally, we're about as far from sanity as somebody who has forgotten the importance of the breath. If you do not think about the breath and your attention is constantly consumed by outer experiences, I strongly encourage you to reflect on how precious this process is. Without it, you wouldn't be here for another 3 minutes. This is supremely good news, because that means the breath is always available. We can't forget it at home like mala beads. It won't slip our memory like a prayer we need to recite but can't remember, or a yoga mat we forgot to bring to the yoga studio. It is always available. Like an unconditionally compassionate parent, it doesn't need their child to love them. The sun doesn't need the flower to give it gratitude or to be aware of the sun. It illuminates everything equally without discrimination. The breath is always giving us life. Aside from the existentially precious nature of the breath, it's profoundly practical to begin to learn to take refuge in the breath itself, to make it our home, rather than the infinite other places our attention could go. Put it this way, there are countless outward directions that your attention can go, but only one direction inward it can go. And isn't that what home is? The one place that it really feels like you can fully and unself-consciously relax into yourself. Or at least ideally that's what home is. The truth is, unfortunately, many home environments are actually much more complex and unsafe because they tend to be shared with other humanoids. But the breath is good enough to keep coming back to again and again. It doesn't displace itself somewhere else. It'll be right where we left it, over and over again. If you think about what it means to focus, essentially it operates in the same way as a laser does, which is just a technology that allows us to take many light waves and make them behave as one. It synchronizes them and aligns them. And as we begin to align our attention with the breath, what starts to happen is a process that begins to actually align our whole lives. Because the breath is a witness to everything that we do. We can forgive somebody who is a rageful driver if they don't become aware of their anger. But once that person is constantly aware of their breath, that process continues, even when they're flipping someone off or yelling at them for cutting them off on the street. The breath begins to become kind of an accountability buddy. It's like, hey, I'm still here, and makes it much harder to find excuses to not pay attention. Another reason why it's so powerful is because of how simple it is, paradoxically. I think a lot of people look at practices like this and they go, what? That can't actually help. My life is complex. It's full of difficulty and challenge and nuance. How is something as simple as focusing on the breath going to help? But its simplicity is exactly what makes it helpful. I've heard teachers of mine say on numerous occasions that samsara is not separate from the conceptual mind. Cyclic suffering is not separate from the conceptual mind. In fact, it isn't even caused by the conceptual mind. It is the conceptual mind. the complexity, the conceptual proliferation, which grows out of proportion and then makes us feel like we're drowning in it. How could we fix something like that by adding more complexity? How can I repair a broken window with a hammer? Simplicity is the exact antidote that we need. It's so simple, in fact, that even though there are a variety of different kinds of breath practices, if you're talking about pranayama or other ways of manipulating the breath, at its core, Anapana practice, just the practice of noticing the in and out breath, is super simple. It's so simple, in fact, that it's only 3 steps, and the third step is the same as the first step, and you can repeat them infinitely. Each time that you apply these instructions, that's like doing 1 rep in the gym of your mind. So here are the 3 instructions, and then just repeat them a trillion times and come talk to me. First, intentionally focus your attention on the breath. We might call that concentration. Second, notice when attention has drifted from the breath. We might call that mindfulness, because we can't notice what we don't pay attention to. Third, return attention to the breath. Again, if you're somebody who wants to begin to develop a meditation practice, this is the only instructions you need to get started. First, focus on the breath. Second, notice when you're no longer focusing on the breath. Third, focus on the breath. Every single time you do that, you are reclaiming a little bit of agency. Every single time you're doing that, you're coming a little bit closer to home. And the more you do it, the more consistently you're able to maintain that awareness. And it's gonna be messy, and it's gonna be cyclical, and you're gonna backslide, and it's not gonna be linear. The more you're gonna be able to enjoy your life and have some sense of agency in where it's going. The simplicity is not a flaw, it's not a quirk, it's not a byproduct. It's one of the most important, helpful, and meaningful defining features of what makes breath-focused practices so powerful. The complexity of our mind is a huge cause of what makes us so angry, what makes us so anxious. It's what makes us addicted. We're chasing anything that can bring a moment of quiet, a moment of focused attention, which is why addiction, and dopamine more broadly, is all about the chase. It's not about getting what you want. It's about that focused state of pursuing the object of desire, which temporarily leads to a subsiding or simplifying of the conceptual process. Then you get what you wanted, and that process starts over again. And we really stay stuck in that for a whole lifetime, across lifetimes, across entire civilization cycles, until we begin to notice the ways in which these processes operate. So the breath is always present, it's always available, and it's also non-conceptual. We can argue all day about politics or philosophy or interpersonal issues, but we cannot argue with the breath. All we have to do is check in this moment. The breath exists just like the truth, I think, regardless of whether we believe in it or not. Gravity applies even if I think I can fly. The earth is round even if I think it's flat. The breath is here, right in this moment, even if I take my attention away from it. In fact, the only place it can exist is in this moment. And to come back to the breath, even just for a moment, is to come home to the only reality we will ever truly have contact with, which is this mysterious and sacred present moment. From the first moment we grasp for breath and open our eyes, our only true companion is the breath. Think about the body you had when you were 1 year old, or 10 years old, or 30 years old. Your bodies will change completely. Think about the relationships you have. Those will change completely as well. Think about the emotions you've moved through, or the thoughts you've had, or the environments you've inhabited. Every single one of those in 5-year periods is going to be so different from the past 5 years, let alone decades. The only thing that has remained constant, humming in the background, in, out, is the breath. It defines the moment of our birth, the moment we come into existence in this body and in this form. Ah, yes, this being has taken their first breath. Now they exist as a seemingly autonomous entity, and it defines what we call death. Ah, yes, this person is dead now. Their body is no longer breathing. Please recognize that. Recognize how precious it is as a resource for you to tap into now. You don't need to pay $5,000 to go to a seminar. You don't need to subscribe to an expensive training program that can show you the magic ways to come out of suffering. You have this precious resource with you always as a birthright, same as your awareness, same as your capacity for change. You can use it at any time to support yourself in navigating the otherwise extremely turbulent waters of your life, to anchor yourself, to learn to do one thing at a time, not spread yourself thin and do 100 different things at a time or try to do that. You can make it a new habit so that in a moment's notice, you know how to find your way home to yourself. I kind of went off on the breath. While it provides an entryway into practice, the reality is that over time, and in the face of the realities and complexities and turmoils of life, we need much more than just that. But in the same way that a camera is useless if it can't focus, or a microscope can't help us see clearly until it's able to zoom in, all other talk of practice is nonsense until we learn to tame our attention, at least to a degree, with the breath as an ally. In future videos, I'll talk more about the elaboration and deepening of practice as I experience it, and I'll invite other people who have much more insight and experience than I do to share their perspectives. Hopefully this was helpful. If you don't have some kind of breath-focused practice, hopefully this is a motivation to get started. If you do have one, hopefully this is a reminder. I know I need the reminder to prioritize it in your life, to make time for it. As the Zen proverb goes, if you don't have 10 minutes to practice for 20 minutes. Hopefully, if enough of us can actually begin to tame our mind, tame our attention, collectively we can begin to feel that and resonate on a totally different frequency. As usual, I'll make a short ask. Please consider becoming a patron for these videos. I'm gonna keep making these videos anyway, but it's super helpful if you can. Share your thoughts and comments below. I wanna hear from you. I want other people to hear from you. I wish you only success in cultivating your mind. May you and all beings enjoy happiness and its causes. May you and all beings be free from suffering and its causes. And finally, may this channel self-destruct.